You're listening to Your Superpowered Mind on the Superpower Up podcast, the show that investigates the innate power within your brain to create lasting change.
Hey everyone, welcome to Your Superpowered Mind. This is your host, Kristen Maxwell, and in this show, we explore the process of transformation and give you tools and strategies you can use to transform your own life. Today, we're going to be talking about how to own your power and never binge eat again. Our guest today is Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I think this is going to be fascinating. He is the author of Never Binge Again, which is a book that has thousands and thousands of 5-star ratings on Amazon. In the past, before he wrote this book, he was a psychologist and the longtime CEO of a multi-million-dollar consulting firm, which serviced several Fortune 500 clients in the food industry. He spent decades researching the nature of binging and overeating with work with his own patients and a self-funded research program with more than 40,000 participants. His book, as which we'll go into, outlays an unusual psychological method to stick to the diet of your choice. So I am intrigued to hear more. Welcome, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Please call me Glenn. It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. So my first question is always, what superpower did you uncover as the result of mastering your mind?
You know, I think it's a superpower that we all have, but it's obfuscated by some cultural myths, and it's minimized by the advertising industry and a lot of what goes on in the big food industry. So that superpower was deciding how to choose what I could put in my mouth or not. Well, when I finally realized that I was in control of my arms and my legs and my hands and my mouth and my tongue and my throat, and that it was only me that could get out the car keys and walk to the car and open the door and start the car and drive to the store and take out the package and walk up to the counter and hand the lady the money and count the change and put the junk in my bags and walk into the car and open the car again and start the car and go in the corner of the parking lot and open the bags and put it in my mouth and chew and swallow. When I finally realized that was actually me and that I had all those opportunities, every little step along the way was someplace that I could intervene and change, I suddenly realized that I could decide on the kind of person that I really wanted to be around any food, regardless of how powerful the cravings were, which are stimulated by the food industry and the lizard brain. That I really had the ability to decide on the kind of person that I wanted to be, and that we all did all along. It just, because of what's going on in our society, it required more focus and clarity and a little bit of upfront thinking work to make it happen. So did I answer your question, or what was that's the superpower?
Well, it sounds like you have discovered the superpower of, well, you said it, deciding on who you wanted to be. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that they have that power. Or if they think they can pick it, they don't know how to do it.
It's the superpower of self-control as a matter of character, but not character in the religious sense or in the sense that someone else defines for you. Character in the sense of how you habitually respond to a tempting situation, no matter what. And even if it's not something you can do right away, character in the sense of something that you can cultivate and the kind of person that you can become. So for example, I decided at some point that I'd had enough of binging on chocolate. And at first I tried 6 ways to Sunday to become the kind of person who only had chocolate on the weekends and only had chocolate, after a 1,000-calorie workout, or only had chocolate when he was at a Major League Baseball game or something like that. And that helped a little bit, but eventually I realized it never was a lot easier than sometimes for me personally. And if I just became the kind of person who didn't eat chocolate, then all of my chocolate decisions were made for me, and I didn't have to continually wear down my willpower every time I was at a Starbucks looking at a chocolate bar at the counter, thinking, should I or shouldn't I? Because, all the research on willpower says it's a fatigable muscle that's worn down by decision making. There are only so many good decisions you can make over the course of the day. And so if you have thought through these very well-defined rules that distinguish healthy eating from unhealthy eating, and just thought through when you do what, then suddenly you have a lot more willpower to spare because you're not making decisions all day long. And then that superpower to become the kind of person that I really wanted to become, it left me with a presence of mind where I suddenly felt like I could connect to people even better than I ever had. And I spent a lifetime learning how to connect to people as a psychologist, and it was the most important thing in my life to me, was to be able to connect to people and, and help them with their issues. But the food was in the way, and once I stopped binging, my binges usually started with chocolate. That's not the only thing that I would eat, but they usually started with chocolate. Once I was able to stop, I was suddenly so much more present, and I felt like everyone was smiling at me. And the truth is that those smiles were there all along. I was looking down, or I was so busy recovering from the bloat and the pain of overeating that I wasn't noticing them. But it's the power to be who you want to be and the power to be present for your life. That's the biggest superpower that I discovered.
That's great. And that is a superpower that I think all of us, whether we know it or not, that we would love to have is, and you said a lot in there, because I know that there are plenty of people out there, and there have been it's something I've grappled with too in the past, who you said you just became the kind of person who didn't eat chocolate. And so when some people hear that, that's like, are you kidding me? I just did that? Like, that is crazy.
Well, it wasn't quite that simple.
Yeah, right.
I spent 30 years trying to figure it out. I come from a family of psychologists, and I discovered when I was about 17 that if I exercised really hard every day for 3 hours, I could eat whatever I wanted to. Mm-hmm. And then when I got older, I couldn't do that anymore. I didn't have 3 hours a day to work out. I had maybe 3 minutes to work out, as I was married and seeing patients and commuting 2 hours a day. So I spent 30 years going to psychologists and psychiatrists and Overeaters Anonymous, and I even conducted a 40,000 person study over the course of 5 years. And it was a very soulful journey. I would characterize the whole thing by saying that I was going on the theory that I had a hole in my heart, and that if I could figure out how to fill that hole, then I would stop overeating. As if it wasn't what I was eating, it was what was eating me. Mm-hmm. But eventually, when I stepped back and I realized that it all kind of came to a head when I talked to my mom about the results of the study. And one of the results of that study was that people who struggled to control chocolate like I did, they tended to be lonely or brokenhearted. And I asked my mom, I said, Mom, I'm not in a great marriage and I'm kind of lonely and brokenhearted, but what is it in my history that would have set up this pattern? Because she's a therapist and she raised me. Mm-hmm. And she got this horrible look on her face and she said, I'm so sorry. And I said, what is it? And she says, well, Glenn, when you were about 1, my father, your grandfather, had just gone to prison. And I adored this man. He was my whole life. He was the only thing I held on to. And he was guilty. He was really doing these things, and my whole world came apart. And I was horribly depressed. At the same time, your father, my husband, was a captain in the Army, and they were talking about sending him to Vietnam in 1965. And I thought I was going to be a single mother, maybe a widow, and I was going to have another kid on the way. And my father was in jail, and I was just so depressed. And scared. And I sat and I stared at the wall most of the time. And when you would come running up to me, we wanted a hug or some love, or you wanted to play, or you wanted some food, I just didn't have the wherewithal to take care of you. And so I pointed you to a refrigerator that I kept on the floor where there was a big bottle of Bosco chocolate syrup all the time. And I said, go get your Bosco. And you go running over and you'd suck on the bottle and go into a chocolate sugar coma. And so, Kristen, if this were the movies, then mm-hmm. at this point, Mama and I would have a big hug and a big cry. And I'd never have trouble with chocolate again. But what actually happened was my chocolate problem got worse because there was this voice in my head, which was a voice of justification. And it said something like this: you know what, Glenn? You're right. Your mama didn't love you enough. And until you can fill that big chocolate-sized hole in your heart, you're going to have to go right on binging on chocolate. Let's go get some more right now. Yippee. And that was the first clue to me that maybe I didn't have to solve all my psychological problems before I could stop overeating. Maybe the problem was this voice itself. Maybe it was like, suppose there was a big fire in a fireplace inside the house, and I've been spending all these years trying to put out the fire, trying to understand the fire. But what if it was okay that there was a fire, and the whole problem was that there was this illogical voice that was poking holes in the fireplace and letting it get out to burn the house down? And that what I really needed to do was challenge the logic of that voice so I could hear it more clearly, so I could know when it was attacking, and so I could either ignore it or disempower it right away.
Wow. You know what? I want to hear so much more about how you get started with that. But I just stopped you right there because we have to go to a break before we can really dig into how it is that you do own your power and never binge eat again. Mm-hmm. And so can you tell people where they can learn about you? Because you have tons of great, great material online to help people with this. Where can they find you?
You go to neverbingeagain.com and click the big red free bonus button. And you can sign up to get a free copy of Never Binge Again in Kindle, Nook, or PDF format, along with a set of food plan starter templates, regardless of what dietary philosophy you're on. There is a set of rules that you can customize for yourself, and a set of recorded coaching sessions, because the technique I'm going to tell you about to accomplish this is really, really weird, and it sounds really harsh. When Kristen and I talk about it in theory, you're going to say, what is wrong with this woman? Why does she have this doctor on her call? But if you hear me actually coach people through it, you say, oh, now I get it. This is a life-giving, esteem-enhancing, hope-enhancing process, and I want to learn more about it for myself. So neverbingeagain.com, click the big red button.
Great, thank you. Definitely, if this is, you're going to hear more and you're going to want to look this up. So let's take a quick break and hold on.
Are you here to change the world? Do you talk about things like vibration, frequency, awakening, and consciousness? Are you pretty sure you have superpowers? The Superpower Net is unlike normal coaching programs and conscious communities. We provide training, intuitive guidance, peer-to-peer learning, intensive one-on-one coaching, and a high vibrational network of people just like you. When you join the net, you get 24/7 access to a collaborative group of people who support you as you master your personal power and unlock your superpowers. If you're ready to use your superpowers to change the world, then join the Superpower Net today. Visit superpowerexperts.com/the-net to learn more.
Welcome back, everyone. This is your Superpowered Mind, and we're talking to Glenn Livingston on how to own your power and never binge eat again. And so I stopped you before because I know that what everybody here who was listening is wanting to know is, okay, I every day say I'm not going to eat chocolate or I'm not going to do this. And then by the end of the day, or maybe 3 days later, at some point, I break down and I have it. So how do I change that?
Well, first of all, you got to be really clear on what it is that you want to do with chocolate. Do you never want to have it again? Do you want to try to have 2 squares a day? Do you want to have it on the weekends? What is it that you want to do? And draw a very clear line in the sand. And it should be something that if I followed you around all day and Kristen followed you around all day, that it would be really clear and we would agree whether you did it or not. So no ambiguity whatsoever, really clear line in the sand. And then what you want to do is make a solemn oath to not to never have another craving again, because you will have cravings, but to separate your constructive versus your destructive thoughts about food. See, the mind changing, the chronic ambivalence, the I don't care, F it, we'll start again tomorrow, that all comes from an overstimulation of your reptilian brain. And the food companies today are engineering food substances that are they're not really food, they're food-like substances, and they're concentrations of sugar and fat and salt and oil and excitotoxins and starch and sodium and things that didn't exist in this concentration on the savanna in the tropics while we were evolving. And what they do is they signal your lizard brain, which is the part of your brain that doesn't know love. It's the part of your brain that only knows survival. Eat, mate, or kill. That's what the lizard brain thinks when it sees the chocolate bar on the counter. Eat it, right? It's forgotten about your dietary goals and your health and fitness goals, and it's forgotten about the kind of person you want to be. It's forgotten about who you want to be with relation to the people that you love. It's just eat, mate, or kill. And you need to understand that when that's activated, that it's just a bodily organ generating a biological urge, just like your bladder generates an urge to pee, or your ovaries or your testicles generate an urge to kiss an attractive person. And that organ is not in control. You're in control. You can decide when and how and where and in what way that urge is going to be expressed. There are some urges that you can't ignore entirely, like you can't ignore your bladder entirely because your bladder will tell you otherwise eventually. Similarly, you have to eat. You have to keep your blood sugar up, or eventually all of these concentrated forms of blood sugar will look more and more appealing, and your reptilian brain will say, this is a matter of survival. I don't care about your goals and plans. So a lot of the things that we find with people who have that reversal of intent, who continually change their mind, when you go back and you analyze the day, they haven't really had enough to eat. They haven't had enough healthy things to eat. They let their blood sugar go too low. And as a result, their body was forcing them to be less discriminating. So there's that. Make sure that you're well-nourished, reliably nourished, that you're not trying to fast for half the day and then find yourself, irresistibly tempted at a Starbucks. So now if you're willing to separate from that organ and you recognize that it's not really a game of loving your inner wounded child, there are associations with food and your inner wounded child, and you can learn a lot about yourself, but it's not really associated with stopping, because we're not eating just for comfort. We're eating to get high with food. Mm-hmm. And so if you give that inner your lizard brain, if you give it a name so that you know it's very separate from you. I call mine my pig. I call mine my inner pig, and the things that it squeals for are pig slop. And when my pig says, hey, Glenn, you worked out hard enough to have a bar of chocolate, I'll say, I don't want that. My pig does. My pig is squealing for its slop, but I don't let farm animals tell me what to do, and I never eat pig slop. And as crazy as that sounds, it gives me those extra microseconds at the moment of impulse to remember who I am, who I want to be, what I wanted to do with chocolate, and make the right decision if I want to. So that's really how it works, and it's more of a game of ruthless domination. You think of yourself like an alpha wolf, the leader of the pack, and the pig, your reptilian brain, is like a challenger for leadership. And when a challenger in a wolf pack tries to take control, the alpha wolf doesn't say, oh, it looks like someone needs a hug. It doesn't go over and kiss them. It snarls at them as if to say, look, get back in line or I'll kill you. This is not a game. You get back in line. And that's the aggressive attitude that you need to have. At least that's the one that's worked for me and thousands of other people. That's the aggressive attitude that you need to have to take control of the lizard brain. There are one or two more things you can do that are helpful. What you need to understand is that the addiction to overeating or binging is not just an addiction to overeating or binging. It's an addiction to the feast and famine cycle. So virtually everybody that I talk to who has trouble with overeating inevitably tells me that they're a very good dieter, and they go through periods where they can eat well for months or weeks, and that they've been down near their goal weight on a multitude of times and they just go all the way back up. And they don't realize that they are signaling their body that we live in periodic times of starvation. Maybe not completely starvation, because maybe, they're having a very low calorie diet. But if you're losing more than a pound or two a week, then you're probably undernourishing yourself during those periods. And so when the body perceives that calories and nutrition might be available, there seems to be a mechanism, I think it's an evolutionary mechanism, that takes over and says, hoard them, take in as much as you possibly can. And so if you don't want that mechanism to kick in, then you have to let go of the famine part of the cycle also. You have to keep yourself regularly and reliably well nourished. The last part is to understand that because this seems to be an autonomic response, it's like an activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which says, we got to get food now. This is the most urgent thing. We need calories right now. That the parasympathetic nervous system has the ability to override that. And the parasympathetic nervous Mr. Lips and Mr. Tongue when you say that word. The parasympathetic nervous system is the part of us that calms us down and cools us down and takes us out of that emergency status. So we're not in fight or flight response anymore. There's no emergency. Now we can take our time and make decisions. And the way you do that is to take a deep, deep breath and tense everything up as hard as you possibly can. And then let it all out and relax. And do that 3 or 4 times. By the 4th time you've done that, you shouldn't be in fight or flight response anymore. And you should have the opportunity to make a better decision. By that point, you should realize, I don't want that. My pig does. I don't want that. My reptilian brain is squealing. Let me remember what I wanted to do. And then you might need to go and get yourself some real nutrition. I know this is crazy, but I discovered that the key to stopping chocolate for me was banana kale smoothies. Every time I started to crave chocolate, I said, okay, well, this is not going to satisfy the craving, but it's going to take the edge off of it so it's tolerable. And I'd have a big banana kale smoothie. And 6 weeks later, I find that I was craving banana kale smoothies instead of chocolate. So you don't have to believe me. Every bone in your body can say I'm full of it, but just try it. There's usually some underlying nutritional, authentic need. It's like when a smoker stops smoking, it's really helpful if they take deep breaths of cool, fresh air every time they have a craving, because they're undoing the biological error that confused smoke with oxygen. And that's what we're doing here. We're undoing that biological error that's confusing all of the industrial products with the foods that we really need in our life, which are usually some form of fruits and vegetables.
Right. Wow. It sounds, it makes sense when you lay it out. And I'm sure for some people that still seems a little bit impossible. But what I heard you say that really seems key is getting to the point where you set, and this is what I work with my clients, is saying you have to have such a bright line on what the rule is, like you said, that there is absolutely no ambiguity whatsoever. So for me, the line I have set is I don't get I don't have sugar and I don't get wine during the week. It's a weekend thing. Mm-hmm. And that is my rule. And that was my rule for years. And the really thing that's very funny right now is I have just this week gone, it's the holidays. And I've backed off, but it took me a few years. So I'm realizing I need to go back and reset that line again, because otherwise you've got your brain constantly trying to talk you out of it. I guess your pig, right?
Yes. And I'm going to say 2 things about what you said. First of all, you don't have to believe me. You just have to try it. Mm-hmm. You don't really have a lot to lose here. And what if I'm right? So you could just take a leap of faith. Secondly, it's really important to understand that feelings aren't facts, mm-hmm. and that the industry is taking advantage of the way that we're set up to feel. We really can be manipulated in such a way as to believe that our nutritional needs are satisfied from a bag or a box or a container. And most of our society says that they don't really like fruit and vegetables anymore. So something's going on. If you look at the animal studies on what happens when you short circuit the pleasure mechanism in the animal brain, the mammalian brain.
Mm-hmm.
You put an electrode in the pleasure center and you wire it to a lever. Those animals will press that lever thousands of times a day to the exclusion of their survival needs. They could be starving to death and they'll ignore food just to press that lever thousands of times a day. A nursing mother rat will ignore her pups just to press the lever. They'll crawl over painful electrical grids. So this is a survival mechanism. I don't think anybody's put electrodes in our brains, but I think that there is an argument to be made that these are chemical electrodes. And when you walk out of a McDonald's and there's a Burger King across the street, are we that far from saying that there's a pleasure button in every corner? I think that we didn't have these things in the savannah or in the tropics when we were evolving, and the natural course of events, the foods that are available today or the food-like substances that are available today, the sheer number of advertising messages that are designed to get you to forget your survival needs and go after what profits the company instead. There are 5,000 to 7,000 messages about food that are beamed at us through the airwaves and the internet every year, and maybe a half dozen of them are about eating more whole fruits and vegetables. When you're going up against that kind of force, when the addiction treatment industry says that you can't quit even if you want to, the best you can do is abstain one day at a time, you're powerless, you might even have a disease. When you have all that messaging and you're trained to believe that you can't do anything about it, then you have to say to yourself, maybe I can't trust my feelings, and maybe waiting until it feels right, maybe waiting until it feels like I can do it is the wrong idea. Maybe you just have to do it and let the feelings come later. So that's what I have to say about that.
Right. So you decide. I hate it when I just say just decide, but it is, you just decide. And, one of the things that I think is interesting and what I see happening with the people I work with is you make a decision, you follow through on that decision, and then at some point you get the identity of being that kind of person. So I am the kind of person who chooses to limit my sugar to the weekends. Like, that's just who I am. And that it's really interesting. So I saw one of the reviews on your website, which I love because it makes it so clear, is you can decide never to binge again, just the way you could decide, just the way that that you would never rob a bank or push somebody into traffic. To have that sort of certainty about who you are and what you're going to do.
One of the examples I give people is that if you walked into a diner and there was a $10 bill on the table and there are no video cameras and there's nobody up front and nobody would see you take it, the waitress says, "I'll be right back, I have to get the menu," and she obviously hasn't seen it, almost everybody says they wouldn't take it under any circumstances. And I said, "Why?" And they'll say, "Because I'm not a thief, and that woman worked hard for her money and I don't want to take her money." And so I'll say, so there is something that would enhance your situation, which would be pleasurable, that you would never do. You have an unwritten rule inside that says, "I never steal." Even if you don't get caught, you never steal. Why, as a matter of character, why can't you do that with food? And that wakes some people up and makes them realize that they can. And what you need to understand is that part of you that's fighting back right now, because it inevitably, as people are listening to this, they're saying, "That's ridiculous. That's like that Bob Newhart sketch where he says, 'Just stop.'" That part of you is your pig squealing in and of itself. It's starting to recognize that you're seeing yourself as superior and it doesn't want you to. It wants you to keep feeling like it must be something different. It's got to be more complex than that. It's got to be, it's got to be something that happened to you in your childhood. It's got to be something you have to fix in your life. But what if it really was that simple? What if you really could do this? And you didn't have to figure all that stuff out. I've got compassion for all the things that happen to people in their lives. And I think people that really struggle with overeating tend to be people who have been overly shamed. I think a lot of them have been sexually abused. I think a lot of them have had very difficult childhoods. And by all means, if you need a hug, I'll give you a hug. If you need psychotherapy, I'll give you psychotherapy. But I don't want to confuse you by making you think that you have to do all that first before you can stop. Because if you stop, the hug is going to feel better. The psychotherapy is going to go a lot quicker and be a lot more effective. So, I happen to have discovered that you can expose the squeals and disempower them and ignore them, even if you haven't solved all your trauma, even if you're miserable. I mean, none of this is guaranteed to make you happy, right? Mm-hmm. I could help you stop binge eating and you could still be miserable, but at least, you won't be miserable and a binge eater. I tell people if they've got 6 problems and then they binge eat, then they have 7 problems. So I could take away the 7th problem. And that does give you a lot more energy to solve the other problems. And people do tend to naturally get happier, but it's not guaranteed.
Right. Well, there is something that the food does to your body, I think, and depending on the quality of the food you're eating, that just biologically then makes you depressed. And then there's the shame that goes around it. So it clouds the other issues that you're really wanting to be looking at, perhaps.
You need to turn that shame into anger. What's going on today in industry is really inexcusable. I've talked to executives and major food manufacturers. One of them made a very popular food bar. And they told me that the way they got it so popular and made so much money with it was to take the vitamins out of it because the vitamins were interfering with the taste and costing a lot of money to produce, and to focus on the packaging instead to make it look healthy. And this guy told me this with a lot of pride, like he figured out this brilliant marketing insight. But I said, so you're faking people out. you're faking them out. And I don't mean to single out this guy. This goes on all over the place. So
that's crazy.
So you don't have to feel ashamed. You do have to energize yourself and define how you want to be. And you have to believe that this is possible. And like I said, if you don't believe it's possible, then listen to a bunch of the people that I recorded and see how we change their mind and how well they're doing. So
that's great. Good. And that leads in, can you tell people again where they can find your materials and your interviews and all of that? Because, if this is something that you struggle with, I think I love your way of dealing with it.
NeverBingeAgain.com. Everything's at NeverBingeAgain.com. Click the big red button and sign up for the free bonuses.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I have really loved talking to you. I think you've got a lot of people really thinking and questioning and maybe thinking, okay, I can do that. I can try that. So thank you for being here. And all of you listeners, thank you also for being here, for wanting to take charge of your mind and how you live, and go out and remember that you do hold the power to change and transform your world.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.